I want you to imagine a commercial. Screen starts black, and there's foreboding music playing. Then the first scene, you have an adolescent boy, he's lying in bed, he's angry, he's frustrated, there's tears in his eyes. And he's staring down at his hand. And in his hand, he's holding his father's 9mm handgun. Now imagine a father walking in, and maybe they have some angry words and shout, but then the father sits down, starts talking to him. Music brightens up a little bit. Then in the next scene, we see the boy in a counselor's office. He looks engaged, he looks hopeful, he looks optimistic. The music hits a bright crescendo, and the final graphic says, "Counseling, it really works." Now, you don't see commercials for counseling, not because it doesn't work, but because it's not created by a multi-billion-dollar industry that puts more money into marketing than it does into research. You do see commercial after commercial for psychotropic medications that don't work that well because they are made by multi-billion-dollar corporations that put more money into marketing than they do into research. This discrepancy is about money and power. It's not about what works.
Now to the mysterious death of a billionaire couple found hanging inside their mansion. Police are calling the death of pharmaceutical tycoon Barry Sherman and his wife Honey suspicious, saying both were strangled.
Barry Sherman, he's chairman of the pharmaceutical company Epidemic, was found dead Friday in his Toronto area mansion along with his wife. Her name
Barry and Honey Sherman were one of the world's wealthiest couples, worth $3.2 billion, thanks to their pharmaceutical empire.
We started Apotex in 1974, almost 40 years ago.
Known for giving tens of millions of dollars to charitable causes.
But because his company made cheap, generic drugs, Sherman had plenty of rivals.
We're Apotex. We're in your corner.
On what has become a homicide investigation that is garnering worldwide attention.
It makes and exports generic versions of brand name medicines, often putting him at odds with other drug makers.
I have come to believe that the answers are not in the medical journals, but in the leadership journals. We as a society rely too much on pills and not enough on people. Our human need of significance, love, and connection can never be met with chemicals. There is something wrong going on here. Simply focusing on opioids makes no sense.
Okay, so there's something that I would like to show you. Every one of those little pills represent a person that we lost.
Let's discuss, though, how we arrived at this place, because over many decades, Big Pharma has invested heavily to make the system work in its favor. Once Big Pharma swallows up the little guys, they focus on another core competency, and that's marketing. According to the Washington Post, 9 of the 10 biggest Big Pharma companies spent more money on sales and marketing than research and development. 2013, Johnson & Johnson, $17.5 billion on sales and marketing, $8.2 billion in research and development.
As the numbers of opioid-related deaths are rising, Dane County is taking action to battle the epidemic.
The source of these drugs and the major gateway to addiction, be it prescription drugs or heroin, is these prescription drugs. And the manufacturers have known for many years that these are highly addictive. They continue to push these drugs. They continue to advertise these drugs.
They're going after drug makers, distributors, and retailers, alleging they're putting billions in profits over public safety.
And get this, we are told they've had 2 more overdose deaths since this event this morning. The suit alleges they all engaged in racketeering, aggressive overpromotion, and false claims regarding the safety of the drugs.
That's why since 2000, the number of opioids dispensed in this country has nearly quadrupled.
What is crystal clear is the opioid epidemic is a symptom of a much deeper epidemic. It's the pain beneath the pain. It's the pain of despair, loneliness, depression. It's the pain of lack of purpose, lack of faith, lack of love. This is emotional pain. It comes from devaluing humans.
All of these actions, the way Big Pharma prices drugs and the way they conduct business, demonstrate a priority of profits before patients. Now, I believe in capitalism. I believe in profits and well-functioning markets with competition and rational pricing. Big Pharma is not interested in competition or capitalism, but monopoly control and profiteering.
Taking all those things into consideration, according to the statistics, there's a silent hurricane going on in our state that has hit us. And it's getting worse, and it hits us every year. It's called the opioid crisis. And you don't read about it much because the news tends to focus on other things.
2 years ago, I found out that our prescription drugs are the third leading cause of death after heart disease and cancer. Our drugs kill around 200,000 people in America every year, and half of these people die while they do what their doctors told them.
But just to look at the statistics, you will see that it is quite alarming. In the last 3 years in South Carolina, opioid-related overdose deaths have outpaced homicides and drunk driving deaths by nearly double.
For the last decade, we have been in the midst of the worst drug epidemic in American history. Worse than the heroin epidemic of the 70s, the AIDS epidemic of the 80s, and the crack cocaine epidemic of the 90s. I'm speaking about the opioid or prescription painkiller epidemic.
In communities across the nation and here at home, the opioid epidemic is tearing families apart. It's taking parents from children and children from parents.
For the first time ever, drug overdoses are the #1 cause of death in Americans under 50. Under 50, you're in your prime. And by the time I'm done speaking today, 1 person will have died.
Much of what the drug industry does fulfills the criteria for organized crime in US law. And they behave in many ways like the mafia does. They corrupt everyone they can corrupt. They have bought every type of person, even including ministers of health in some countries.
I should say I'm going to miss both of them dearly.
Today, Ontario's health minister somber and recalling his time working alongside Barry Sherman and his wife, Honey.
There's an active police investigation. What I will say is that they were lovely, caring individuals.
I have a pretty colorful collection of things people have called me during all these years. And sometimes journalists have asked me, why do you always look up controversy? And my reply is, I don't. Controversy looks me up. Because it's not popular to tell the truth in healthcare. You will get a lot of enemies, because a lot of people make money on false premises, doctors and industry alike.
Scottish philosopher Adam Smith warned about this behavior hundreds of years ago when he wrote The Wealth of Nations. He wrote, quote, "To widen the market and to narrow the competition is always the interest of the dealers, which is an order of men whose interest is never exactly the same with that of the public, who have generally an interest to deceive and even oppress the public, and who accordingly have, on many occasions, both deceived it and oppressed it."
Addiction means to be enslaved to. You're under the influence of a drug that causes you not to have the ability to care. Research shows that the neural pathways of the brain begin to change. We must begin to understand addiction as a brain illness and not a mental illness which stigmatizes the disease, just like we don't stigmatize cancer. And furthermore, addiction in itself is not a criminal act. The same cannot be said for those pharmaceutical companies that misled everyone that their drugs were safe.
He fought for what he really thought was right and provide generic drugs that made it possible for those that weren't on drug plans to get the drugs that they needed for the ailments that they suffered.
This is not a new message. It's a message that's not getting any airtime.
The father of late actor Heath Ledger says prescription drug abuse is spiralling out of control. The Hollywood star died from an accidental overdose at 28 years old. His father, Kim, says the misuse of medication is a public health epidemic.
There's been conjecture that in Heath's role as the Joker in The Dark Knight,
it's simple. Kill the Batman.
That this role essentially spiraled him down into the dark depths, and this contributed to his demise. There's a very different story to that.
The truth is, he was super happy and was loving life, and he struggled with some demons, but he wasn't wanting to go anywhere but forward.
Heath died from an overdose of prescription drugs. He essentially became his own pharmacist.
It's just something that's not really been spoken about, and it really needs to be.
And back in the 90s, we pharmacists, myself included, were filling OxyContin and Vicodin pills like candy. Without any red flags, it was the norm.
This is the big pharma way. Large amounts, profits before patients. Ladies and gentlemen, this debate affects all of us and everyone we love.
Let me give you an example of word magic. Mental illness is caused by a chemical imbalance in your brain. Now, most of you have heard this. Some of you may believe it, but you might be surprised to find we don't have any evidence to support that assertion. Those of you familiar with research databases like Medline may be surprised to know that if you enter chemical imbalance in as a search term, you get about 18 unrelated papers, none of which supports the hypothesis that mental illness is caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. This is a misnomer, but it's a misnomer that has been capitalized on by the pharmaceutical companies. But it's a belief, it's not a fact. You will hear this in commercials, like commercials for antidepressants. The narrator will say, "Some people believe depression is caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain." They have to say belief because there's no evidence. It requires faith.
It's the pain beneath the pain. It's the pain of despair, loneliness, depression. It's the pain of lack of purpose, lack of faith, lack of love.
Now, I'm giving this talk today because I've been shaken to the core by the violence in our society. The gunning down of teachers and students in their classrooms can only be described as evil. Our response to this evil has been a national dialogue about gun violence, media violence, and about mental health. But where mental health is concerned, there's a problem. The public doesn't know what mental health professionals like me do know. And more importantly, the public doesn't know what mental health professionals like me don't know. But what we're learning is a majority of them were taking psychotropic medications when they committed the acts of violence. Now, we can't confuse correlation with causation. Just because someone was taking a psychotropic medication when they committed an act of violence in no way means the medication caused the violence. Most people know that. What most people don't know is if someone's taking a psychotropic medication, especially a child or an adolescent, we have no clue if anything therapeutic is happening. Let me give you another example of word magic, a little variation. Psychotropic medication corrects a chemical imbalance in your brain. Now, the brain's the most complex thing we know of. And right now, we have no idea what balanced brain chemistry would look like. So we can't say what unbalanced brain chemistry is. We do know you can intervene chemically, and some but not all clients will have improvement. That in no way means the chemicals affected by the intervention were somehow unbalanced to begin with, any more than if you smoke a joint and feel better, it means you have a cannabinoid imbalance. The logic doesn't follow. But it's this kind of illogic that sells a lot of medications, and this is why more and more Americans, and especially children, are being placed on psychotropic medications they have no business being on.
But this morning, a community in shock after a real estate agent preparing for an open house reportedly found the pair hanging from a railing near this indoor pool inside their more than $5 million Toronto home. According to friends of the couple, they were both eagerly awaiting a trip to Florida. Honey Sherman had recently sent an email saying, "I am coming south Monday, December 18th to Friday, January 12th.
And so what would make you think then that it's someone that would know the couple?
Well, maybe not personally. I mean, someone could have been sent there. I'm only suggesting that whoever is driving this crime has some sort of relationship with one or both of them, because this is not the type of homicide that occurs because somebody breaks in your house. But this didn't happen just because somebody is upset. This happened for a reason. This is sort of a payback on something that occurred. I mean, if you look at the type of homicide that's occurred, and what's been described, at least in the media, is that these bodies were actually sort of displayed, hanging. Now, that sets up a whole different dynamic of what the bad guy is trying to tell the rest of us as to why they were killed, and to actually make sort of a statement about it.
A more modern group of philosophers, one of my favorites, Depeche Mode, also wrote about this kind of greed. They said the grabbing hands grab all they can, all for themselves, after all. The grabbing hands grab all they can, because everything counts in large amounts. This is the big pharma way, large amounts, profits before patience.
I received a note from a former inmate, and what he said to me was remarkable. This emotional pain cannot be relieved with a chemical substance. It takes human involvement. When a person is valued and surrounded by love, when he knows he's not alone, he is able to deal with his pain.